envy. We might think, well, is envy such a big deal? You know, it's not often we talk about envy, but actually, I think envy is a very big deal. Warren Buffett, who is currently, as in April 2021 figures, so it's pretty recent, he is the 7th richest person in the world. He's a mega investor. And he says, it is not greed that drives the world, but envy. And what he's basically saying is this: it's not that we have a greed to want more and more and more and more and more. It is that we want more than those who are around us. We see what other people have got, and if they've got more than us, we envy them and we want more. If we have more than everybody else, then envy is much less of an issue. Greed is much less of an issue if you have more than those around you. But here's the problem. Envy is driven, therefore, by what we see around us. And if you kind of go back to survival reasons why envy might be a good thing, if you're part of a small community and you see other people have more than you, then the drive is there for you to go out and gather more food or build something better. And you want to progress within your little community. And envy in that setting is kind of why the emotion envy exists. But now, the problem is we see advertising. We see social media, we see celebrities, we have programs about the massive house or the brilliant car. And the problem is that we're no longer comparing ourselves to a couple of people in a small community and thinking, I want to get on in my community. We're now looking at the richest people in the world, at the people who have the biggest and the best. And that leaves us feeling like we are missing out, like we don't have as much as we could have. And that drives envy. God warns about envy about 20 times in the Bible. And you know, sometimes when you have that list where it says, beware of, and it starts listing sins, you'd be surprised how often envy is one of those sins that it specifically says, be careful about that. And the reason that God warns us is not because he's concerned with how it affects him. Our envy does not affect God. But what he is concerned about is how our envy affects ourselves and affects those around us. So, envy is something that crops up in the Bible again and again and again. I want to talk about 4 things today to do with envy. Number 1. So what's wrong with envy? If envy is a sin, that is, it's something God doesn't want us to do because it hurts us, hurts other people. Why? What's the problem with envy? In Proverbs 14, verse 30, it says, envy rots the bones. You can be having a good day, and if the emotion of envy starts to take control, it immediately makes that day rotten to the core. You may have something that you feel good about, and you see someone's got something better, and suddenly you don't like the thing you've got because you want what they've got. Something often happens. I don't know if you've ever been aware of this. Have you ever seen food envy in a restaurant? Have you ever got a plate of food, and you think, oh, look at my lovely plate of food, and then you see what somebody else has got, and you go, oh, I wish I'd chosen that. I want what they've got. You see, you have a perfectly brilliant thing, and then envy comes along, and suddenly it starts rotting at what you've got. Envy is essentially about comparison. Envy only exists where there is a comparison between what you've got and what somebody else has. So let's think about the problem of comparison for a second. First, there is never a win in comparison. Okay? If you start comparing yourself and saying, where do I fit? What have I got in the big scheme of things? You never win that because there's always somebody with more than you. And the problem with comparison is this: it damages relationships. It always causes a damage. There's never a win because either you end up feeling arrogant which is not a good thing, or you end up feeling a failure, which is not a good thing. And this is the problem with comparison. When you start comparing yourself, even if you do feel that you're better or have more than those around you, that actually doesn't put you in a good place. Feeling superior, feeling arrogant is not a good thing, and that damages your relationship with people around you. Let's be honest, you do not want to be friends with someone who's arrogant, who looks down on you. So there's no win in comparison. The other thing is that envy can make us glad to see other people fail. And I hate this about myself. Okay, maybe you're not like this. Maybe I'm the only one. But sometimes when somebody that I compare myself with doesn't do as well, doesn't do as good a job, doesn't get as much, something goes wrong, there's a little bit of me that goes, ha ha, yes. See, I'm not the only one who makes mistakes. I'm not the only one who isn't perfect. They're all so great. And then I stop and I think, why? Why am I glad in that person's misery, in that person's failure? And I stop myself and I realize, but in that moment, why do I feel that way? And the reason is this, because if they're brought a little bit lower, then in comparison, I feel a little bit higher. This is the bizarre way that envy works. It puts us in a scale. Envy is trying to put us in a place. We're trying to decide where we're at. And when we see people go down, then envy tells us that we're a little bit higher up, which is nonsense. It's stupid. And yet, it is how envy can make us feel. And so, envy controls us. It controls our mood. Because you have never felt envious and it made you feel better. It doesn't happen. Whenever you feel envy, it always makes your mood worse. It controls your mouth. Sometimes we lie. We lie about what we've got. We lie about what we're feeling. We lie about whether we care or not. Because we don't want people to think less of us. Because we envy what they've got, so we pretend we're as good or as happy as they are. Sometimes it leads us to say hurtful things to the person that we're envious of. So envy can control our mouths. And of course, it can control our actions. Because of envy, we end up buying things that we don't need with money that we don't have. And so much of debt in society is effectively driven not by greed, but by envy. Because people see the adverts, they see the stuff on social media, they see the stuff on telly, and they say, I want that. And so they borrow money to get something they don't need with money that they don't have. All that is what's wrong with envy. So, what's God got to tell us about envy? In Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verses 4 to 8, let me read what God has to say to us. I saw that all labor and all achievement spring from a man's envy of his neighbor. And this too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. The fool folds his hands and ruins himself. Better one handful with tranquility than two handfuls with toil and chasing after the wind. Again, I saw something meaningless under the sun. There was a man all alone. He had neither son nor brother. There was no end to his toil. Yet, his eyes were not content with his wealth. For whom am I toiling, he asked. And why am I depriving myself of enjoyment? This too is meaningless, a miserable business. Okay, let's pick out some things from that. First of all, in verse 4 of that, it basically says we're working hard because we want what our neighbor has. Very often what we are doing is envy, comparing ourselves to our neighbor, and we think, right, I'm going to work hard because of that. It's worth mentioning that the word that's here used for working hard or toiling or labor, it doesn't just mean to work hard. Working hard can be a good thing. But this carries with it the idea of a burden, of being worn down, okay, which isn't a good thing. And in that verse, and those verses, twice, God says, it is like chasing the wind. Trying to be happy by getting stuff is like chasing the wind. He says it is meaningless. Chasing the wind is meaningless. It is pointless. Have you ever caught the wind when you chase? No. The wind is uncatchable. There is no finish line to the job of chasing the wind. It is never caught. The wind never stops. You are constantly just chasing this thing that you can never achieve. In chasing the wind, there is no peace, no contentment, no satisfaction. In trying to achieve happiness by comparing yourself to other people, there is no peace, no contentment, no satisfaction. And this is an important picture. The first tool I'm giving you today, or that God's giving you today, is when you feel envy, when you feel your mood coming down because you see somebody with more than you, just say to yourself, I'm chasing the wind. Remind yourself what you're doing in that moment is all you're doing is chasing the wind. You're not any happier because you're feeling envious. It's not going to make you achieve more. You are chasing the wind. That's the first thing. Next verse, in verse 5, he says, a fool does nothing and ruins his life. So there's a bit of balance here. God doesn't say chasing after things is meaningless and pointless, therefore do nothing at all. God is not saying do nothing. In fact, he says, if you do nothing and you just sit there and you fold your hands and do nothing, you will ruin your life. So he's absolutely not saying don't bother to work at all. There's a balance. And he explains the balance in the next verse. He says, better one handful with peace than two with hard work or trouble or that, remember this word means worn down, that labor, that burden idea. Better one handful with peace than two and being worn down and burdened by your efforts. That's the practicality of how we live life and combat envy. So, don't lose your peace to get more than you need. Some people lose their peace and they struggle and they strive and they feel burdened and actually they get nothing from it, at least nothing that they need. What they need is peace, and what they aim at is material wealth, and it does not help. It's worth remembering that different people have a different drive to progress. So I'm not saying that all of us have the same happy place of how much is worth putting effort in or how much it will be the struggle we put in till it becomes burdensome. So I know some people who've got incredible drive and they work so amazingly hard, and I think if I worked that hard, I couldn't cope. I would lose my peace. I am happy for them to work harder than me, achieve more than me, because if I tried to work at that pace, I couldn't cope. And yet for them, that's the pace where they don't find it a burden. They don't find it a struggle. They are enjoying the fruits of their labors, and it's not burdensome to them. I also know it can change over time. I know I can have times where I really can work hard and it doesn't feel like a burden, and other times where I'm really struggling and I have to back off a bit and take a step back and do a bit less. So we're looking for balance, and we recognize the balance might be different for different people and different at different times, but there must be a balance if you're going to overcome envy. Okay, some practical help, some practical stuff to help you in controlling your envy. 1, be aware of your envy. It's chasing the wind. I've already said that to you. If you find yourself feeling envy, then stop and say to yourself, stop that, Ian, or obviously insert your own name. If you see me being envious, you can say, stop that, Ian. But for you, say, stop that. That's just chasing the wind. It's pointless. Take control of that emotion. Second thing, don't feed your envy. What do I mean by feeding your envy? Well, I've already said that our envy is fed by things like advertising, social media, stuff like that. If you look on social media and you see people who you are constantly feeling envious of, then maybe stop following them. I'm not saying you have to, but because you might have a good relationship in other ways. But if you constantly are seeing stuff like that, if you look at websites, like celebrity websites about the latest fashions, the latest gadgets, all those wonderful things, and you look at those and you think, you feel bad because you can't have them, well, stop looking there. Don't feed your envy. Third, Jordan Peterson says, compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to someone else today. So I guess what he's saying is this. If I look around the room, if I look around my neighborhood, if I look around people on telly, and I compare myself to all of them, that's chasing the wind. It's pointless. But if I look back at my life and say, am I making progress? Am I improving? Am I making progress on my journey? And if I'm not, that can encourage me to try and do more for me. And if I'm doing fine, if I'm thinking, gosh, you know what? I'm better off this year than I was last year. Or I'm achieving more this week than I did last week. In that comparison, you can feel happy about yourself. You can take some, the Bible calls it take sober judgment. You look at yourself and you think, yeah, I can say well done about that. Because I'm only comparing me to me. That is worth doing. Next one. Think what you are thankful for. If your eyes are fixed on what other people have got, you won't be thankful. But if you think about what you're thankful for, that Christian phrase, count your blessings, that will really help you to overcome your envy. Because if you stop looking at what you don't have and start looking at what you do have, you will feel happier. Next, celebrate others' success. So, do you remember I said sometimes if you see someone fail and you feel better, and you think, well, that's really bad. If you see someone succeed and you feel envious, you feel really bad. Here's a way to overcome that. And the more you do this, the more it will change your heart and envy will be less of a problem. If you see someone succeed, congratulate them. Tell them well done. It will start to change you. It will start to change the way you feel. If you're going for a promotion and so is somebody else and they get it and you don't, if you sit there feeling envy and anger, you are going to feel miserable. And if you go up for them and you say, well, I wish I'd got it, but congratulations, well done, and celebrate their success, it will change how you feel in yourself, how you feel about them, and it will change your relationship with that person. The last one, the practical thing is this. Recognize where envy damages or defines a relationship. Now, for some of us, maybe most of us, there is no relationship or situation where it is being defined by envy, but it might be damaging it. The first classic place where envy is a problem is siblings, brothers and sisters. Have you done as well as your brother, sister, when you do that comparison? Is your brother stroke sister an irritating person who's always going on about how successful they are, and you don't feel as successful, and it maybe damages your relationship? It might even define your relationship. What I mean by that is, if you're in the same room as them, immediately envy comes to the surface. And envy affects your mood, it affects your mouth, it affects your actions, because you are envious of the person you're with. It might be a brother-in-law or a sister-in-law. It might be a work colleague. If you're at school, it might be someone in your class who always gets better marks than you, or always is better at sport than you. It might define your relationship that you look at these people who always seem to get their way, always seem to be successful, and you compare yourself and you are being defined by that envy. And because of that, it damages your relationship with them. If you're aware of that, try this other stuff to overcome it. But the other thing that I want you to do is consider admitting it to the person you are envious of. Now that might be harder or easier. It might not be worth doing in some settings. It probably is not worth doing it in a school setting. It's probably very worth doing in a family setting. Because the best way to stop envy damaging and defining a relationship is to get it out in the open. And be honest with the person and say, do you know what? I want to celebrate your success. I want to say how good you are. The truth is, sometimes I feel envious of you. And it will change your relationship with that person. Now, if they're horrible about it, that's a shame. Most people will be remarkably understanding. Most people will probably say, well, I'm envious of that other person. They might even say, well, I'm envious of this aspect of you. And you're envious of something about them. They might be envious of something about you that you didn't even realize. Consider admitting it if it's damaging or defining a relationship. Okay, last thing I want to talk about. Let's get to Ecclesiastes 4 and that last verse 8. And the question here is, what's the point? Overall, what's the point? Effectively, this is not the whole verse, but taking out a piece of the verse, it says, "For whom am I toiling?" the man asks. "And why am I depriving myself of enjoyment? This too is meaningless, a miserable business." So in this little passage about envy, it ends up with a man saying, why am I even working this hard? Who am I working for? That is a really important question. If you are feeling driven, if you are feeling like you want to achieve, if you are feeling like you want more, if you're feeling like you want to have as much as those around you, ask yourself this: who am I working for? Why am I losing my peace to try and measure up to this imaginary standard? You could look at it with this question: what am I trying to prove? In working hard, in getting these possessions, in having these things, what am I trying to prove? You could even ask yourself, who am I trying to prove it to? Because the truth is, the drive that we have is often not a drive that comes from us. It is a drive that comes from other people. Sometimes we want to prove something to our parents. Our parents have set us a standard. They have said or brought us up to achieve at a certain level. And you end up wanting to have something or wanting to work that hard because you're actually being driven by what your parents told you as a child. You are being driven by other people's expectations. You are looking perhaps for approval. So in this question, who am I working for? You can have positive reasons like, I'm working to support my family. Great. But you can have very negative reasons like, I'm trying to win approval. Sadly, there are people in this world today whose parents are dead, and yet the person is still being driven to seek their approval. They are laboring and working and slaving, living up to an approval of a person who is no longer alive. And if that resonates with you, stop chasing the wind. Stop looking for an approval that will never come. It's not their approval that counts anyway. Better one handful with peace than two with all that hardship and trouble and toil and being worn down. Last thing on this. In Mark 8, verse 36, Jesus asks, what do you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your own soul? Is anything worth more than your soul? Fundamentally, envy is about comparison, and it's about comparison of standard of life. But if we spend our lives seeking a higher standard of life, do you know how much of that you take with you when you're dead? Nothing. You take no money with you. You take no possessions with you. And yet, we find ourselves, because of envy, striving to achieve in that realm of life. And Jesus says, it doesn't matter how much you gain in that realm of life if you don't look after your soul, if you don't go to heaven, if you don't have a relationship with God, if you don't have connection with God. So beyond everything else I've said about envy, have perspective, have priority. Who are you working for? If you're working for yourself to improve your standard of living, okay, but don't do it at the expense of your soul. Don't work so hard that you don't pray and you don't read the Bible and you don't go to church or anything like that. Use your money not just to further your own goals and your own ambitions, but to support and to help others. Because what do you benefit if you gain the whole world, but you lose your soul?